And it may be that you just have a general interest. It may be that you have specific things that you want to do. It may be that you subscribe to the whole Adobe CC package and you think, what on earth am I doing that? And let's make some good use out of it. But generally speaking, we want to elevate your understanding of how a document goes together so that your use of InDesign actually takes you beyond what you might actually end up doing just with a Word document, because you can create a Word document, you can export that to a PDF, you can have images on it, but your use of InDesign has got to take you further. It's got to go beyond, and that's going to be the point of today. So we're going to use a couple of spreads out of the last magazine as our start point, and we're going to explain some of the things that facilitate a design looking like a magazine. And Martin, are you handling little queries as they come up? You're muted. I think you're muted, Martin.
I was muted, sorry. I was just saying, I'm sure you see the messages, but as I find the correct point in the conversation, maybe I'll bring them up. But Lucy's just asked about, can we possibly see how to do a voucher brochures? And work
I mean, really what we're going to do, you'd apply this certainly to a brochure. Certainly this includes how fonts work and how you do some proper management and use of fonts rather than just sticking a font somewhere. Also style sheets, etc., etc. So all of that's going to be in there. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, and we're going to right. So hopefully this is all going to work out right. So what we're looking at now is the final press PDF of the last issue of The Photographer. And the two spreads that we're going to concentrate on is from the new qualification section for Barry. And it's these two spreads that we're going to talk about, and we're going to see how these would go together and be built as a simple 4-page, 2 spreads InDesign document. So within that, we're going to go all the way through really and deal with all the elements that construct it. And that's going to include handling images, it's going to include master pages, it's going to include fonts, it's going to include paragraph styles, character styles, positions, frames, all of that really good stuff, which it takes you to be able to produce pretty much anything that you want. So that's where we're going to go to, but let's first just talk about, and if you can follow my cursor around, I had a little bit of difficulty with screen zooming. It doesn't seem to work in Zoom, so I'm going to try and keep this quite nicely paced so it doesn't stagger all around your screens. But let's talk about some constituent parts of pages. Now, one of the things to understand is what things are called in a page layout. And so in the top corners, the 4 top corners and the bottom corners, you've got crop marks. Now we all know what crop marks are, but you can see you've got 2 sets of crop marks. You've got outer set here and an inner set. And the difference between those, well, what is that? Well, that is bleed. And the standard for printing anything and preparing any printed document outside of the realms of Word is that bleed is 3 millimeters to all edges. So the difference between the outer crop mark and the inner crop mark is 3 millimeters. And that's to allow for the resulting printed document to have the ink or the picture or the color going all the way over the edge of the paper when the page is actually cut. So that gives us a hint to what the outer one is called. That's called the trim marks. So that's, sorry. you've got the trim area, and then you've got the document area. So the document area plus 3 millimeters is the bleed area. So the document is going to get cut here, but it has to exist and be printed 3 millimeters outside of that in order for the cut line to take the image all the way down to the edge. Now, why is that important for you to know? Because you need to be able to set up an InDesign document from scratch. And let's just pile over to InDesign, and we're going to go File, New Document. So we need to be able to understand and put the right things in all of these boxes. That might seem to you straightforward, but there's some easy problems to not trip over, basically. So width and height is obviously straightforward because that's what you want it to be. And the number of pages is straightforward because that's the number of pages you want it to be. But what's facing pages? And what is not facing pages? What is start number? And these are actually extremely important foundations of your document. So let's do both. So if we say we're going to have an A4 document, so 210 by 297, and it's going to have 2 pages and start on page 1, and it's not going to have facing pages ticked, then what does that give us? So let's press create. Okay, now in the, I'm going to have to move you guys over a little bit, over to there, I think. Wonder if I can actually just hide that. Yeah, I'll do that because you're looking at yourselves otherwise. Now, in the pages panel, so if you've got a number of workspaces available to you, and up here you can see it says printing and proofing. These are the different workspaces that you could have. I tend to use print and proofing as a default, and that gives you these different panels as the default. You can obviously customize all of this. But in pages, now you can see that you've just got 1, 2, and if we pull down another page from the master, 3, and they follow each other. Yeah, so that's just a normal document in a similar way that you would see in a Word document. It's just pages. But what if we do it differently and say, no, we want facing pages, and let's just put 4 pages in there, and we'll see what happens. So the start page is still number 1, so let's create that. Oh, that's a bit different, isn't it? So if I can ask you to look at the pages panel here and see how this is very, very different. So now you've got a spine, which is the middle bit, so the binding of a magazine or a brochure. And now you've got a right, a left, a right, and a left, which effectively would be a 4-page folded A4 brochure. So that is a front page, 2 pages inside as you open it, and a page on the back. Now, that is what facing pages does. But you can also control whether the document starts on a left or a right. So if we go again and have another new document, and we change that start page to 2, then because 2 is an even number, when you create that document, hey presto, it starts as a spread then. And this is quite an important difference because that is how you can control whether you are creating spreads, whether you are creating like a bound document, whether you're doing, posters, a business card, so on and so forth. They're going to have different layouts like this. So let's just recap on that. So our initial document here, which did not use facing pages, I'm going to just move my tools out of the way. And let's just delete 3 of those now. So you've got a little bin icon down at the bottom. You can just shift select pages in the page panel and use that bin to delete them. This does not have facing pages, so it does not take into account the idea of a center of a brochure or a magazine. And so this could be how a business card was done. Something like this. This is our version with facing pages. So you've got a 4-page document, right, left. Notice that right-hand pages are always an odd number. Left-hand pages are always an even number. And if we insert some new pages into this, it'll always follow that process. So if we click on page 4 there's nothing on it yet, obviously, and then go layout, and we go pages, insert pages, and we insert another 4 pages after page 4, then it's 5, 6, 7, 8. But odd numbers always on the right, even numbers always on the left. And contrast that again with our layout that we created with start page 2, and you can see that we're going left, right. So we haven't got a page 1 here. So often that is actually what you do. And sometimes you want to separate out different parts of a document. I do it with the magazine actually quite a lot. So I separate out the covers as individual documents, and then the contents page, which is page 1, and then my complete document is actually from page 2 to 64. So 64 would be a left, page 2 would be a left, page 1, the contents, would be a right. So that nuance is all dealt with by that little tick box there, facing pages. So that's why it's important. Now also, let's close that for a sec. In our document here, we are seeing the white area, which is the page itself, and you've got a red box outside it, and that is the bleed area. So if we wanted this document to have a little color tab or something up at the top like that, and we wanted that color tab to actually bleed off the page, you'd have to set it up like that. And let's just zoom into that. And you can see that that box isn't set to the edge of the page size. It's actually set wider than the page size to your bleed area. And that is how it should be set up in order to bleed off. And the difference, the 3 mil is just for mechanical tolerance, because the page is printed and then it goes through a trimmer, and it needs 3 mil to be sure that the mechanical tolerance of a page being placed in a glorified, extremely big guillotine is 3 mil to ensure that it all appears as you want it, like that. So how do we set that? How do you make sure that your bleed document actually exists? Well, that's one of these down here. You see bleed and slug in your new document panel. You've got 3 all round, and this little chain makes all the settings the same. So if I just unchained that, see it breaks, then I could have 6, 3, 3, 3, but you would never have that. There's no reason to have that. You'd have it all the same, which is 3. So that's just an industry default. To have an image or pictures or color bleeding off the page, you need 3 mil to that edge. So whether that's the top, the bottom, the left, or the right. Slug is something different altogether, and is not something that you really need to worry about, because slug is a way of creating extra space underneath the artboard of the piece of work. And it's only something that, for example, advertising agencies would use it when they're supplying artwork to a publication or a magazine or something. And so you'd have the actual advert with its crop marks placed, and then at the bottom you'd have maybe all the graphics information and who did it and the agency that did it and all of that. So it's a slug is like other information about this, and it would never really be of interest or need in your application of InDesign. Excuse me. So bleed, yes. Margins, yes, but let's talk about margins. So these are the primary setup. Let's talk about margins. So let's go back to our PDF of the magazine. This is the full magazine. And you can see, here's a good example of margin. So you can see down here, you've got a standardized bit of white space, which is always the same. So here we got images bleeding off. There they bleed off. And you've got margin there. And you can see, obviously, the setup of the black background is pushed all the way into the bleed area. And this is margin. That's margin. And also to think about when you're thinking about setting up a document, and I'd really encourage you to try and think clearly about this, is try and think about margins, but also an eye line. And an eye line is an area or a space which is always consistent throughout your document. And so you can see an eye line here. This is the eye line. Now the eye line in this document, in this magazine, is actually 44 millimeters. And that's just something that I've established. But if now that you're aware of the eye line, so it's generally the point at which the first line of text appears in the body text. So this is body text. So now you can start to appreciate it. You can see it's there. This is the eye line of the magazine, and it's always the same. It can actually be broken, and it gets broken a lot. Here, I've completely broken the eye line, but you need to have it in order to have what you might consider to be, there you go, that's a really good example. That's where the eye line is for the magazine, and you always come back to it. You can break it, and like here, you've got the eye line, but I break it with the little picture there, but you always come back to it. You see that the eye line is always established somehow. And this is one of the things which makes the document that you're creating actually a design. If you don't think about margins and an eye line, then you might as well really just be doing something in Word. But margins and eye line are absolutely critical. So let's go back to InDesign. Now, I'm going to close that and just take us to our finished piece for a minute. And we can see these pink lines. And you can see that stuff sits on these pink lines. So this is the pages that we're going to be dealing with. And margin is critical. And you can see that the top strap on the right-hand side sits on the top margin. Same is true on the left-hand side. Text sits on that margin line. The margin also controls where the text sits into the spine. So you see, if I move that box up, you can see that these pink lines here are the margins. Sometimes within print and in the design industry, that's referred to as type area. Oops, sorry about that. That's my calibration warning. But type area, margins, the same thing. So it determines what you're going to do, and it gives you rules for your design. And if you don't have rules, as in, I don't mean rules as in rulers, I mean rules as in restrictions on your design, then it won't feel like something you've actually worked on. It'll just feel like an amalgamation of stuff. And the critical thing with InDesign is it's encouraging you to do things in a consistent and designed way. And that's why your setup and your establishment of your margins and your eye line is just so important. So where are the margins? We just dealt with that. It's the pink area. The pink line demonstrates our margins. Where is our eye line? Well, I've got that as a guide, and you can see that we've got a guide here. That's the blue line, and the guide across here. And you'll notice, I can't click on it. I can't click on that guide. Well, why is that? Well, that is because that guide is locked on the master page, and we're going to talk quite a lot about master pages, because that is also really, really important with InDesign, and this premise of getting things consistent and the same through your pages, because that's what sets your document and your use of InDesign apart from somebody who has just bashed something together in Word. So try and bear with me on this notion about why we are using InDesign and why we want to set margins and use guides and use eyelines. So how did I come to the margins that I'm using here? So let's have a look. So under the layout column here, you can see you've got margins and columns, and you can see now that in this document, in the photographer magazine, I've got a top margin of 15 millimeters. So that's that one there that the straps sit on. And then I've got a bottom margin of 12. Now, interestingly, the bottom margin here, it doesn't, in my design here, it doesn't do an awful lot, but what it tells me is what's the bottom baseline of text. So what I'm going to do in a minute is I'm going to show you the baseline grid, because that's another element which makes an InDesign created document different from a Word document. So we'll move to that in a minute, and you can see that you've got inside of 20, which is that one, the inside margins, because this is a facing pages document. So you've got a right hand and a left hand page, and you've got, this is the middle. And so that's the binding here. And so you've got 20 millimeters there, but only 15 millimeters as the outside margin. And you can see how straight away InDesign is taking you to a different kind of level. Now, why would you have a bigger margin in the middle than on the outside? Well, obvious, because a 64-page magazine is going to be perfect bound. And when you perfect bind a magazine, you lose a good 3 to 5 millimeters in the binding. So it's parts of the page that you're not actually able to see when you open it. Now, if you're going to perfect bind something, you have to bear that in mind. If you saddle stitch something, which is staples, then it's not so much of a worry, because you can open it completely. But in the case of a perfect bound document, which you probably want to do for anything more than 40 pages or something, you need to consider the fact that you lose a few millimeters either side in the binding, and that's why we have a 5 millimeter bigger inside margin than the outside, because then it feels like it's the same size. So margins are really, really important. Columns are as well, but I don't set that distinctly. We'll show you columns a little bit later as we go along, but that's okay for now. So setting your guides and your margins and your guides is going to help your structure, but you know, your margins do something. It tells you where to put things. And so let's now go through what this effectively amounts to. So you can see we've got here a frame. Everything in InDesign lives in a frame. Text lives in a text frame. A picture lives in a picture frame. This is a text frame. That's a picture frame. A picture, because it's another piece of media, when you move your mouse over it, you get this circle here. So the frame that this picture is in is the blue area, the image frame. But then the actual image itself, if I just zoom out a little bit, and I click, when my pointer becomes a hand, and I click there, you see it changes, and I see a red frame. And this is the actual entirety of the image. So you've got, now I've got control over this image, and I'm going to move it about. I'm not moving the image frame. I'm moving the image inside the image frame. So your basic frames are outlined in blue, and then your content here, this image, the media that's in it is the red or orange extremity of it. Yeah, and you can move that about. And the difference is just your click. So I'm not selected on anything. I select that picture frame, and then I can click it, and then I'm dealing with the image inside. And don't get too confused over that. It's an important distinction and something to try and get used to. So I'll just move that back to where it roughly was. Now, you can see that what I've done here is actually used, I'll just zoom in a little bit more. I've actually used the margins as my guide to how this image is going to sit on the page, because that's what design is about. So you've got these pink lines, which are my margins, and I've not exactly, but the arm is finishing, the little V in the fingers is finishing on that pink margin line, and the hand is going towards that, you know. Again, over here, his shoulder is sitting on the margin. I didn't have to, you know, sit it exactly like that. There is a little bit of crop involved in here, but you know, this is just part of a difference between using imagery in a document and using imagery as the imagery. You know, you're going to use something and develop a design to show imagery, if that's what you're doing. If it was a portfolio, a kind of magazine portfolio, or a brochure or something. So you know, try and get into the idea that you want to actually design some constants in your document, and that's what margins do. So you can see with the text box here, this is a text box, and it is 60 millimeters wide. We'll talk about that a little bit as we go along, because consistency in sizing of boxes that contain stuff is really important for your design to feel good. So let's look up a little bit, and we can see straight away. Now, can anyone guess what the size with the width of this text box is? Well, it's also going to be 60 millimeters. So it's going to be the same. And try and get into the habit of using the numbers as well. Now, don't expect these numbers to be big round numbers, but if I'm not clicked on anything at the minute, you know, I click on this text box, you can see I'm selected on it because I've got access to the control corners. But up here in the right hand side, when you're on the printing and proofing workspace, you can see it's got an X and a Y position, its width and its height. Now you can change them by inputting to these boxes, obviously, but notice that that X position, as in its position from the top left of the whole document, and you see this little grid here, you can change where these measurements are taken from. So at the moment, I've got the top left corner selected. So when I'm clicked on an item, this text box, it's saying that it's the X position is 230 millimeters from the origin, which is the top left. If I change that, then clearly that will change. Exactly. And if I move it to the middle. So it's changing its understanding of where that's sitting. Now, obviously, when I get to this next spread, that text box is the same distance in terms of its X position, because it's sitting on this margin line. And you can go to the view menu. You can go to the view menu and change your screen mode. Okay, and there is 3 screen modes that you might use. I'd really encourage everyone to work in normal, because that means that you're going to see the margins, the guides, the frames, and try and get used to it. I know it might feel like it's a bit messy, but you can actually see what's going on. Certainly do not, under view, screen mode, preview, that's not a place to work on your document, because you can't see any of the control. You know, you haven't got all your guides or all the things that make it right. And then obviously you can also, should you want, you can show the bleed as well. But I'd really encourage you to work in the normal screen mode, because that's the nuts and bolts, and it'll help you get used to it. So what else is in this document? And then we'll show, I'll go through how you build it. So the other things which are important are styles. And this is a little bit messy in this finished one, but I'll show you it all cleaned up. But you have generally style sheets to deal with text, and you can have character styles as well. I've got one there. So it makes it easy to make the fonts all the same. And whether that is here, we've got running text, the main body with an indent on the first line. And then here, this is your first para with a drop cap and no indent. And you're going to want to apply those all the time. And then if we open the paragraph tab here, a little often overlooked item is this. And you can see you've got align or do not align to the baseline grid. So I'm going to just zoom in and then turn baseline grid on, which is just a view option. So view, grids and guides, hide baseline grid, or view, grids and guides, show baseline grid. So this blue, like a sheet of paper, is showing you that every line of text is locked, no matter what, to the baseline grid. And that, again, is what makes, if I go back to the PDF, the line that this text is on here is the same line as, if you like, the equivalent that this is on here. So every single line of text within the whole magazine is on the same grid. And that is one of the simple things that you can do that makes your design of a brochure, or even the simplest postcard, it doesn't matter what, lock it to the baseline grid, and then it looks and feels an awful lot different than having different text on different baseline grids. So you can see here, what I'm saying is that this text is on exactly the same line. And that's really, really important. So let's just do something to illustrate that point. So let's highlight a word in here. And we're going to go up to the font size, which is up here, and I'm going to make that much bigger. You see what's happened? It hasn't pushed the rest of the text around because it's just kept it on the baseline grid. You can see what's happened there. So in other words, the baseline grid lock overrides everything, which is just another element in your designing of something that will actually, start you off on the right foot is probably the best way of describing it.
Jonathan?
Yes?
We've got a question that says, how do you lock the baseline grid? How do you get the text to lock?
Well, I'm going to show you that in a minute when we start actually building a page. So you'll see that in action. But the simplest way to show you, if I just I'm going to make a text box, and I'm just going to unilaterally pop that in here. So everything in InDesign is a frame. So to have text, use text frame using the text type tool here. You draw that frame, and I'm going to apply a style sheet, and then I'm going to type some text. Right. So that is locked to the baseline grid. Yeah. And then I'll highlight it, and then under paragraph, you see you've got align to baseline grid or do not align to baseline grid. So if I do not align to baseline grid, you can see how that's jumped in the frame. So you can see now that bit of dummy text we just whacked in, that's not locked to the baseline grid. There's just these controls in the paragraph tab. You've got two controls at the bottom, locked, unlocked, locked, unlocked. And obviously that's something that you would set as when you make a style sheet as well. So style sheets are just like a bit like actions in Photoshop, if you like, a bunch of settings all rolled together, which make you have an easy way of having stuff all the same all of the time. But let's just, while we're here, and I was talking about it anyway, so if we are to go to character and then increase the size of this to 14 point, you can see that it just increases the size along with the leading. Now you've got size and leading. These are in character. This is your font size, 14 point. And then leading is the space between the lines. So not the baseline grid. So I'm going to actually turn that off because that'll get a bit confusing. But the space between the lines in the font terms. So if I increase the leading, you can see the space between the lines of text has increased. If I decrease the leading to less than the font size, then you can see that it all crushes over each other. Now you're never going to want to have text like that unless it was a particular typography approach in a kind of big artworky kind of headline or something. So when you're setting a font size, you've got to think about the font size itself, but also the space between the lines. Oops. Okay, and you can see if I increase that again to 18 point, you can see here you've got a descender on the J and the ascender on the F, and then you've got a space, the space between them. And that is the difference between the font size and the leading. And you can see the difference between the font size and the leading here is 4. So 18 minus 14 is 4. And that is represented by that space between the top of the F and the bottom of the J above it. And so that's what leading is. It's a measurement of space between character areas. But that is nothing to do with the baseline grid. So if I was to jump back now and apply the baseline grid in paragraph, you can see that. Now, note that you've got a little red plus here now, which means that you've got overset text because it's breaking these lines to actually miss lines, isn't it? So you've got a line of text, miss a line, line of text, miss a line, line of text, miss a line. And that is because the size of the font is too big to be included within the size of the baseline grid. And so therefore it's pushed it to the next one. Now the size of the baseline grid is something that I would suggest you leave as the default. It is there in preferences for a document. In document preferences, you can change the size of the baseline grid, so the distance between the lines on the sheet of paper, if you know what I mean. But I'd suggest you leave it, to be honest. But you can see that baseline grid kind of is a top level command, if you like. So it has implications. But you can see here that no matter where you move it, it will say, okay, well, I can't fit that font size onto the baseline grid. So therefore I'm going to jump a line, but it will always sit on the next line. So let's move it down and go back to character. So you've got the character window here. We were on paragraph. That's where the baseline grid or otherwise setting is. That's where it lives, those little boxes here. And then in the character window, let's try and say, oh, well, let's do something different. Ah, right. So we've increased the leading again. And rather than having its own measurement, it's just jumped it to the next line that it can encompass it, because lock to baseline grid is overriding that count. So if we then, again, a bit in depth here, but if we take that off, you can see that's what you get now, which is the character leading taking precedence, because there's nothing stopping it. So that's actually, let's put 16 in here. And you can see with baseline grid turned off, and this is the result of it. You can see it's not locked to the baseline grid, and you've got 2-point difference between the top of the F and the bottom of the J. Now, what you want to be having is consistency here. Consistency through a document in terms of font sizes and in terms of leading and the alignment, the vertical alignment of text on lines. And that's what baseline grid does. So that kind of, I think that answers the question. Let's just move, because we were kind of trying to get into document setup, and I'm only too aware that we're like 40 minutes in already, which is slightly frightening, but let's just complete the elements of the page run around. So what else have we got? We've got our top left and right strap. We've got the pictures we talked about, the text box. What else do we have? Footers. There we've got the title of the magazine, the year and the issue, and then you've got a page number on the right. Okay, and then we've got the continue arrow, which means that the feature continues on the next page. Now, what I'm going to suggest to you is that when you make a new document, you need to decide what elements of it are going to be exactly the same on every single page. If you don't do this, then you'll just be developing a little bit of a mess. And so what you need to say is, well, if you decide on your margins, and it's not obviously for me to tell you what the margins should be, then the example I'm showing you, which could be applied to anything that you want to do, it has a role. So these top straps live there. In the magazine, the bottom margin here is actually the last line of type in the body copy. And so if I put the text box, if I move with that middle control point, if I put the text box bottom edge on that bottom margin guide, then it lets the text run down to that last baseline before the margin. Okay, I hope that is obvious. And you will find, if you get yourself out a ruler and go through the magazine, there will never be a line of text that is lower than that baseline. And that's what creates unity in a publication. And it doesn't matter how short it is. It could be a 2-page document. The idea that you turn it over and you have a consistent layout. So margins, guides, baseline grid, font size, etc., leading, box sizes. And it's just really important, because otherwise there's not really an awful lot of point in learning InDesign unless you take a kind of design-led approach. And I'm not wishing to be patronizing in any way, but this is what InDesign is for. So with the idea of asking yourself the question, what appears everywhere, we're going to get into the idea of master pages. So I've switched over to another document, and this is like a broken down version of the 2 spreads. Okay, so I'm just going to zoom it out, and I've just taken away everything. So you can see that it has the pictures just for ease of use, and then you can see that it has genre, subsection, feature, first name, surname, qual. You've got the page number, you've got the issue. So I'm on the Pages tab here, and you can see it says 2, 3, 4, 5. 2 spreads, starts on page 2. But above there, you've got a master. And what that means is that this master page because these actual pages have got A in the corner, then A master is powering what you see currently on the pages. Now, we are actually on page 2 here, so the blue box is showing you that you're selected on page 2. And like, oh, it's really weird, I can't click on anything. When I was in the finished one, let's go back to it, I could click on things, couldn't I? Oh, well, why is that? Well, that's because currently these are locked because they are powered by the master page. So let's pop into the master page here. So there it is. And now, oh, hey presto, we can click on things. So what is on the master page? My top straps, my bottom straps, you've got the date and stuff, and also note that you've got something that says A. Now that's an auto character for a page number. You can go and find it, but it's easiest to it's probably somewhere in the depths of my mind what the actual key combination for it is, but it's a character that you generate to power a page number, because it's, you know, we don't type these in. I might have to Google that actually, to be honest, because I've never actually popped it in for probably about 25 years. But you can see at the minute that our master page and our actual pages are the same. Yeah, so I'm on the master page here, and then I'm going to click on page 2, and it's all the same, because what is on these pages is populated by the master page. So now I'm going to make a change to the master. I'm going to put test in there, and then we're going to move over to our actual pages. Oh, you see it's updated. And then if I add 2 pages after pages 4 and 5, so I showed you how it was done from layout, so pages, insert pages, but you can also just drag them down. So you can shift click on the masters and pull them down to populate 2 more pages, like so. And you can see that everything is coming through. So then if I make another change, I'll add a 2 there in the master page, then on all my pages beyond, that is updated. So this is a great way of having consistency. So you want to make your master page like the building blocks for what you want the pages to look like. So I've got all of those constituent parts. And then obviously what you do is you change them. So you can also see I've got 2 text boxes here. And you can, I know it's a little bit hard to see on a Zoom presentation, but you can see they're in a light color. I'm just going to take the baseline grid off, so you can see that they have a dotted outline. So that's how they appear on master pages. And you can see I've got a 60 mil wide. There we are, and an 8 and a 90 mil wide, and I've got space in between. Another thing to try and encourage you to do is to allow consistent space on a page. Don't fill everything up. Allow some space in your document. And I always, and you can again get a ruler out, text boxes will always be 60, 70, 80 or 90 or 100 mil wide. That's my grid. That's what everything does. And you can see also on this master page, you've got a guide, 2 guides, one on the left, one on the right. And if I click on them, you can see it's at 44 millimeters in the Y coordinate. And so that will always appear. And what is that? That's my eye line. And so the text box is placed, so the top of it is just above the eye line. And why is that? Because if I show the baseline grid, and remember that control is in view, grids and guides, hide baseline grid or show baseline grid, depending on the toggle. It's above the baseline grid above my eye line, because when I put some type in, the ascenders will sit on that eye line guide. And that's how this feel of that you get in the PDF, eventual PDF, like there. So that line where that image sits and that the ascenders of the text sit is 44 millimeters from the trim at the top. And so if you start to construct something, kind of, you draw it out on a piece of paper first, draw a sketch out, and then set it out very formally using numbers, so exact measurements, exact placement, then you'll be actually using InDesign in the way it's intended, and you'll be getting a document which takes you further. So, yeah.
Another question about the master. So that absolutely makes sense for, let's say this was for the qualification section. When you then come to design another part of the magazine, do you create another master, or do you design it as a separate document and then combine them later? What would you use?
It really depends on how different a page might be. I actually have one InDesign document and multiple masters. So you can have as many different master pages as you want, and you can just dupe them. So and then you can apply them to different pages. So
would it be then like B master, C master, or?
Yeah. So if you go, so if I say new master, which I was just control clicking the master here, so you can have master B, and
yeah, that makes perfect.
So and then obviously I think you can do it from, and then I'm sorry, I'm just kind of doing this kind of quickly to try and illustrate the point, but I'm just going to copy everything on A master and put it onto B master. Now, this is something to be aware of, right? So I've just created that new master, but see how the guides are different? So guides are to be set to master pages. Yeah. So you need to make sure of that. So if you create multiple masters, you've got to align the guides. Yeah. So you can see that if the difference between the guides here, they're just default, aren't they? So in the case of what I'm trying to show you, I'm just going to, I think I can duplicate master A. Yeah, and you see then master B has got everything the same. So now, let's say I'll just make a simple change here. So we don't want the two levels of font on here, and this might be called news. Yeah, just to, and this might be section, right? So this is master B, right? And then we're going to create a couple of new pages, so we can just drag those in, and you can see that that now says B on it. Pages 8 and 9 has got B written, and that's come up.
Brilliant. That really answers that question. Thank you.
Yeah, so you can chop and change as well. And then obviously if we then change B to something, then that's going to update. Now the thing whilst we're here, the thing I really must show you is is one of the most critical and confusing elements that people lose track of with InDesign. And that is about unlocking master page elements. So we're on pages 2 to 3, which uses A, and at the minute it's exactly the same. Yeah, but obviously I don't want it to say feature first name surname qual. I need to unlock that element, don't I? Yeah. So one of the things that you just mustn't get into doing is control clicking the page that you're on and override all master page items, because then you're just destroying the idea of being able to use master pages. So if I override all master page items, you see that suddenly, especially if I was on the right page, you see that those frames, because on the right hand side page 3 is remaining locked, and you see they're in light blue, and then here this item is now dark blue, and I can click it. Yeah, so that means that I've overridden everything here, right? So now if I make a change, you know, if I just go Martin, right there, sorry, I pressed my scroll by accident, and then I go back to my master, yeah, and I change that to 3, it's still going to say Martin, but then all the others are going to take up the 3. I hope that's clear, that now I've overridden page 2, all the master page items, so therefore it doesn't update anymore, whereas the other ones do. So you have to bear in mind that. So that's what we don't want to do. But what you do want to do is be making changes to things that you need to change. Now, clearly, this strap at the top, feature first name, surname, qual, is going to change. And so you unlock the individual item. And this is a weird thing about InDesign, in that the key combination to do that is almost like a secret. On a Mac, at least, it is Shift Command. So if I want to unlock something, an individual frame, I Shift Command click it. So Shift Command click that text box. So now that is live and I can work on it. But this one over here, this one is still locked. Yeah, but it's given me its position, but I want to do stuff with it. So I'm going to Shift Command click it, and now it's unlocked. So commonly with this type of spread, the things that I'm never going to touch are the footers. Yeah, because I always want that to be. Now, you know, something might happen, and there might be a conversation or a delay, or something happens in the world, like, I don't know, a worldwide pandemic that we weren't expecting, and the whole magazine or 200 pages of a book might need a change to that footer. And you don't really want to have to do that 240 times, and you want to be confident that it's going to work. And so if I needed to do that, I would go to my master and I'd say, right, oh, the name of this one is actually 4. And I've made that change, and you can see that it works on those 2 of the A. So A there and A there, they haven't been overridden, and it now says issue 4. Page 2, it's still saying 2-3 because we overrode it needlessly. And obviously B is still saying 2-3 because B is a separate master. So we need to go to that B master and change that to 4. And I hope that should give you know, it's an enormous piece of software, but that helps you see how master pages work. So when I'm actually working on something like this, yes, I'm going to have to override individual items. So I'm going to go back to this spread here. And then I need to Shift Command click the text boxes, and I need to Shift Command click that top. Now, in the layout that I'm going to do, I don't want this text box, so I can get rid of it. And then my text that I need to put in is going to go in here. And then this is going to be all changed. So I'm just going to put dummy text in here for now, because it really doesn't matter what it is. And right, so you're typing over that now because you've unlocked it. And then I'm going to grab my image and I'm going to move that in. Now I'm placing that on my bleed line and on my eye line guide. So to pull in a guide, this is generated by the master page. In this instance, I'll just pull in a ruler from the top, just like you do in Photoshop. I'm sure I don't need to be telling people how to do guides, but I'll just show you there. You just pull it in and place it. Now I've done that on the master page, so hey presto, it's going to appear, isn't it, on all those other ones which are set as they are. So just bear that in mind. Or you can alternately just pull in a guide like that, place it where you want. But in this instance, I'm absolutely in love with my eye line and my bleed area, so I know exactly where that's going to get placed. And then if I scroll down again, I'm going to get rid of that box, and then I know that I'm placing that in exactly the right position. And I'd also encourage you to zoom, because let's be a little bit rubbish about it. And if I go, oh yeah, that's about right, well, is it? Is that in the right place? Zoom in. No, it's not. It's only 1.5 mil into the bleed, so that might actually go wrong. So be sure, be certain, get it in the right place. That's why you can zoom in and out in InDesign. So we got a picture there. I'm going to just concentrate on this right-hand one for a second. We've also got our text box. So that was, again, something pre-generated from our master page. But let's just say, if I wanted to draw a new text box, I go to that type tool and I just draw it out like that, and then set its size up in the width. Boom. Okay. So a text box has corner control points. You can move the top and bottom of it independently, and the sides just like very similarly like you'd be used to, and so on and so forth, right? So let's talk about text and fonts. When you have a text box, you've got no text in it, so you need to do something to get text into it. Commonly, you've got two ways of doing that. You might copy and paste from another application. You might have a document like I have here called text to use, and I might go like this, copy, and then highlight my text box. So when you're not clicked on anything at the minute, click on it, you see the control points that shows you that you clicked on it, double click again, and then you've got the cursor, and then bang some text into it. Now I'm going to go back again because I'm just going to put it basic paragraph. Right. So that is gone in with no style sheet on it, but you know, we need to talk about how do we get this text to look right. So let's just highlight this first paragraph, and you've got under the A over here, which is character and paragraph controls your ribbon at the top. Also, you've got the windows. Again, we're in printing and proofing. I just chose to keep to that workspace, but character is going to do the same things. Yeah, so, well, we don't want Mini and Pro, Italic or otherwise. That's not the font that we have. So we need to change that, and the style of it, the size of it, the leading. We know what the leading is now, don't we? It's the space between. And then you've got tracking, and you've got kerning, which is two different things. So tracking is the overall space that a paragraph takes up. So you see this number here, it's currently set to 0. I'll set it to 50. Oh, see how it's all, the actual individual characters have spread out. And kerning is something different. So if I select a letter, like the B on Barry, and then if I give positive kerning, oops, that's just, I'll do it a different way, like that. You can see the numbers are going up, so now it's 335 on the kern, but there is no space here. There's no space character. It's just the additional space outside of the character itself, which is called kerning. So if I change that to 0 again, it disappears. That is a character space. So if I show type, show hidden characters, yeah, a dot, that's a character space. If I take that dot off, so there's no space there, but put kerning between the B and the A, that's what we get. Now, when would you use something like that? Well, you use it particularly with drop caps. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to select the whole of that, and I'm going to go to my paragraph styles, and you can see here that we're currently in basic paragraph. Now, I've got just a few to keep this simple. So I've got body text indent, which most of it runs in. And then I've got body text no indent, which just takes the first line indent off, like that. And then I've got body text drop cap. So what we're going to actually do, rather than just showing you this, is clearly you want to be able to actually make a style sheet. So let's just go through the formalities of doing that, because you want to have text styles that exist all the way through your document. You don't want a mishmash of different text styles. And you can see that in all of these, if I click on paragraph, you can see that the align to baseline grid is selected. So there is a single set of lines all the way through the document, and everything is always aligned to it in terms of running body text. Now, so let's kind of make a, let's override this and just do something different, and then we'll make some changes. And you know, so I've chosen a completely different font, and then I'm going to get rid of the rest of this text, I think. So let's just deal with this first paragraph. So at the minute we are in, let's just take off that drop cap as well, and we're going to sort out, let's just see how we can do it. So just bear with me whilst I'm just redoing it. Right. So there we go. There's some type. Now we're going to set this type up. So we are using Adobe Garamond. So we choose the font family and then the font style. Right. So that's that. And then you've got the font size and the leading. Now, the leading is a bit of a misnomer when you're using baseline grid. So let's just recap on that. So we're going to unlock it, and you can see it drifts up to the top of the text frame. If I increase the leading, which is here, so it's currently on 12. So if I just increase it, and you can see this text spreads out. Yeah, but if I lock to baseline grid, oh, it's jumping now. But if I drop the leading, oh, it's not moving. Why isn't it moving? Until it can include that leading in the baseline grid. Oh, there we go. So they're two separate things. So lock to baseline grid overrides leading. Now, I'm a big proponent of baseline grid. It really upsets me when I don't see it, but you don't have to do it. But I'm just trying to get across to you the difference between baseline grid and leading. So leading is a character control. Baseline grid is a paragraph control, i.e. a page control. Now, the other thing that is commonly done, and I do it myself, is let's just zoom into this type a little bit. I'm going to clean up our view a little bit. Okay. Now, at the moment, there's no tracking on this at all. So if we look at character, our tracking, what does it do again? Let's see. Well, it moves the type around and spreads it out. So let's go up just in single numbers. Okay, so that was 1, 2. You can see the type just drifting out. Now, why would I use it? It's about readability, and this is something you can only really measure actually on a printed page in front of you, a hard copy. But if we look at a few things when it's set to 0, you'll maybe have heard of something called F ligatures, and in this font it's not too bad, but you see when an F and a T sit next to each other, you can see that, if I just zoom right in, the cross of the T and the cross of the F are really, really close, aren't they? Yeah. And sometimes you can see a font in standard form, where I'm just going to emulate it for you, where it actually appears joined up like that. And that makes a font tiring to read. And so what you do is you want to control subtly the amount of space that this font takes up in a horizontal way. Now, I feel that Adobe Garaman Pro in regular form at this size just needs a little bit of extra space horizontally. So I give it 5 in the tracking there, and you can see it just takes up a bit more room. Now, there's obviously lots of variables involved here, but what you don't want to do, and there used to be back in the day when I started out with Quark Express, and tracking was measured slightly differently, but there's really a maximum and a minimum to use with tracking. You shouldn't really be using anything more than 15 in positive or minus 15 in negative. So let's put minus 15 in this, and you can see how much closer everything is. But we've gained a line, yeah? So you see that we're now taking up one less line. Let's pop it back to 0, and it's gone on to the next line. So if you need to gain a line and make a paragraph take up a line less, then you might use negative tracking to achieve that. But if you go much further than minus 15, the text is going to start to look funny. And by funny, I mean that things are just too close. And this is okay. I actually don't go any tighter. The phrase is tighter or loose. I don't go any tighter than minus 10, actually. But if you were to go to minus 30, you can really see how, like, the bottom of the I and the T there are crammed together, and in fact the A and the G in images is pretty much joined up, and you don't want any of that. It's really, really bad form. So with type and fonts, you've got some particular variables. You've got the size, the overall size, 11 point, the leading, which is the space between the lines of the characters, between the ascenders and the descenders. So in here, if I take baseline grid off, this is just the font creating the space, and let's look for an ascender and a descender. So the top of, here we go, this is easier, isn't it? The bottom of the G and the top of the H, and when you highlight it, you see you've got this blue area at the bottom, and that's basically showing you the leading area of that character. And with the G, you can see there. So the difference between the bottom of the G and the top of the H is just 1 point, because the leading is 12 and the font size is 11. Okay, so you've got the font size, the leading, and then the space that characters take up. So we've just done that on a paragraph sense, and you should work tracking, which is this value here showing VA, tracking in thousandths of an M is the measurement. And you should do that as a paragraph. So if I'm going to put 5 on that, plus 5, and it moves out a little bit. And then the final variant that you're going to want to use is kerning, and that is the space between characters. And we showed it a moment ago, and I'm going to show you the P and the L moving out, and you see it's much bigger numbers. So that's 300, and then that's 0. There's a key command for that on a Mac. It's Option arrow right, arrow left, up and down. So 20, 40, 60. All right. And so sometimes in a font, at certain sizes, characters just need little minute adjustments, but particularly when you make a drop cap. Now, the beginning of an article, the beginning of a story, will commonly have a drop cap. And the way to get to it is to highlight your paragraph, and in the paragraph options, so the little sub-menu, each tab has a little sub-menu here, the little lines, and you can go to drop caps and nested styles. And you can decide how many lines and how many characters. So I use 3 lines and 1 character, okay? And boom, there's our drop cap. Now, one of the things with drop caps is different letters will take up different space. So for instance, if I've just changed that to an F, you can see that it's very close to the A, whereas the B actually had more space. So if this was going to be, I'll just redo that, pardon me, redo, right. So if this was going to be an F, then with the cursor sitting between the F and the A, so nothing's selected, yeah, double clicking, triple clicking selects the power, but the actual cursor between the F and the A, I would insert some positive kerning, and let's see it go in the character here. And you see automatically it's actually -48, the value in the kern between the F and the A. But I'm going to just improve that, and you can see the 3 lines going up and down. You see, because of the drop cap having 3 lines, the kern that I put in after the F affects those 3 lines. And I'd set it something like that. And I'd actually just do it by eye. I don't have a certain measurement, because it's different for different characters. But also, commonly, you would use a different font for the drop cap. Now, so this is, although this is taking quite a long time, and I appreciate this is quite a long webinar, but we are getting there. Fonts are generally in pairs. So the body font in the photographer is a serif. So that means it's got taily bits on the letters, yeah? So you can see on the F, taily bits. It's got rounded corners, yeah? So that's a serif font. And then the other headline font and the straps and the footers are in Trade Gothic, which is a sans serif, which is straight and clean. I do warn you that my son's just come back from school and he might dive into this. I'm trying to avoid it. But pairs of fonts. So you generally have a sans serif, which is straight, paired with a serif, which is curly. And so what I do is I bring in that sans serif into the drop cap. And so I make that Trade Gothic bold. Yeah, and then that would obviously be B for Barry, not F for Barry. And then I would adjust that as I feel fit with the kern there. And then it's starting to look rather better, isn't it? Now, what we want, though, is we don't want to have to make that every single time. So this setting needs to become our drop cap para, or our first para. So once you've got all the settings for this sorted out, including your baseline grid, then you go to paragraph styles, and it really doesn't matter what it says at the minute, and you highlight that paragraph, and then go to the submenu there, new paragraph style, and you call it whatever you want. I tend to put little bullets or numbers so I can order them nicely. So I might go 001 drop cap para, and then all the settings that you've just created by adjusting that paragraph are included, because you've highlighted it, and then you're making a new paragraph style from what you've got highlighted. So your basic character formats, you can see that the tracking that we put on it, 5, Trade Gothic, bold in there. Oh dear, what's going on? It's picking up my drop cap, and I don't want that. So this is why we break it out. So what you actually have here is a paragraph style for the body, but then a character style for the drop cap. So what we're going to have to do is make two things to power this, and this I'm trying to make this as a quick way of showing you the difference between paragraph styles and character styles. So let's just return this drop cap paragraphs drop cap letter back to its original. Okay, so with that being Adobe Garamond Pro, now let's make that new paragraph style again, and we'll call it 01 drop cap para, a para, and then you can see that everything's right now. Okay, and it's even saying, yep, we're going to have a drop cap on it. These are all the different styles that go together to make it. Okay, but because we've highlighted it and making new paragraph style, they are already encompassed. And so press OK, and you can see that there it is at the bottom. Now it's not highlighted yet because, and it's having a little plus. Now you see a few things. I can't actually zoom into this, but it says drop cap para plus, and that means there's overrides. And so you're going to go into the submenu and clear overrides, and it's basically just saying that that type as it was had differences between that and the new paragraph style sheet that you've created. But just don't worry too much about that. All it was actually that bit of kerning that I added. So that's our drop cap paragraph done. And so let's just draw another text box over here, just willy-nilly, and put another paragraph in from our, and it's obviously that's not how we want it to look, but we can press drop cap para and clear the overrides, and there you go. It's exactly the same, including baseline grid. Yeah, and then no matter where we move that to, it's always going to stick to that baseline grid. So it's confidence in alignment there, which is just really important. So that's all using our new style sheet there. And then what we could do is we then need another paragraph, and actually we don't want another drop cap, do we? So let's highlight our drop cap para and then duplicate that by dragging it down to that plus sign, and we get a copy of it. So now let's rename that. So double click on it, and we're going to call it 002 body indent. Okay, and notice that when you duplicate a style sheet, it's based on the one you've used. Okay, and that's really important as well. So we're going to have some changes to it. So we're going to take off, go down to the drop caps and nested styles, take those characters off, and then we need an indent, don't we? So you can see that all of this is already set. Indents and spacing, we're going to go first line 1p, which is 4.223 millimeters. And then we'll set that. So, okay, and you can see now that is our body indent. So we're going to cut that out, Command X, oops, that didn't update, there we go. And we can paste that in here, and you see now you've got that. So you've got body indent, style sheet there, first para there. But they are related, and this is what's really important. So if I make a fundamental change to drop cap 001 drop cap para, like, oh no, I shouldn't have clicked on it. I don't actually want to be clicked on it. So bear in mind that when you move around in here, you know, what you're clicked on is going to have a difference. So if I now make an edit to drop cap para, like increase the tracking on the whole paragraph. So let's do a lot, and then preview that. Then that's come out, and it has not affected the related one, but some settings will. I have to be completely honest, that didn't quite work as I expected, but there you go, this is live. So we've got two style sheets that we've just created, those two here, 01, 02, and you can use them. You don't want to have plus signs after those because that means there's differences, overrides. So for instance, if I selected a word, photography there, and then, you know, did something like, again, change the size of that word, it'll let me do it. See, photography is now bigger, but on that paragraph, if I have it included, I've now got a plus sign after the style sheet, the paragraph style, because it's telling me that there's something different in this paragraph than the settings of the style sheet. So again, if I want to get rid of that, which you probably would, then you go to your sub menu and clear overrides, and it puts it back. Okay, so just to finish off our drop cap power, and then I'll probably pause and see how everyone's getting on, because we've been going on for an hour and a half. The last thing we want to do is actually change the font of this F. So let's select the F, change it now to our Trade Gothic Bold, and then what we're going to have is, with that highlighted, make a character style. And it's not going to be based on anything, but you can see all the settings are in here. Okay, and to use that, what we do is when you're actually applying the paragraph style sheet, and you can see at the minute it's now got a plus sign after it because of that F in a different font. But if we double click our drop cap power and go to drop caps and nested styles, you can see that you can have a character style attached to it. So then we'll apply 01 drop cap, and then you see the plus sign has disappeared. So then if we were to, you know, be applying that, so let's just delete all of that text. We select the text you want, drop cap power, and hey presto, you've got all the attributes of the paragraph and the automatic adoption of the character style for the dropped cap, and you didn't have to do a thing. So the setup of positions, font, consistency, margins, guide, baseline grid is what's going to make your document be a whole lot different than what might be in Word. I'm going to pause there, see if you're all still awake. How are you getting on? Anyone out there?
Just give me a sec, Jonathan. I just need to unmute everybody. Brilliant, though. Right, let me have a look. Don't know if I can unmute everybody. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was great. It's quite complex when you're coming from it new.
I know it's a big old place, but if you go for these kind of foundations, then you'll be making good use of it, rather than kind of flailing about. And you know, I was kind of trying to do it from the point of view that, you know, most people are going to be generally, you know, used to Adobe style windows and toolbars and stuff from Photoshop. So I obviously I haven't gone here. I haven't explained what every single tool does down here, but you know, hopefully it was of some assistance overall. Any particular questions from what we've been through?
Yeah, Jonathan, can I ask, when you've just set those two styles of the paragraph and the drop cap, Is that just relevant to that document, or will that remain in there as a memory for when you go and set up a new document?
No, it's just that document. So style sheets are for the document. However, you can import and export them. So again, in the submenu, you can do something called Append. So you see, you've got load paragraph styles. So if I save this, I'll just show you that in action. I'll save that, and I'll go to one of our new documents that we started a while ago. And in paragraph styles now, you can see that there's nothing there. I can load a paragraph style, select the document. I'll try and get the right one here. Probably that one, I think. And it gives me a list. And there's the ones that we did. And so this is, you know, if they're all checked, it'll pull them all in. If you uncheck them all, you can just decide which ones you want to pull in. And there you go. Here they are. So now we can go to the text tool, bash in some type, and there we go. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions? You just need to unmute yourself, Simon.
Yeah, one question. Nothing to do with text, but imagery. If you were using an image, a photographic image, full page, with minimal bleed, what would be the minimum file size that you'd be happy?
Okay. Yeah, this was actually an area I meant to touch on. Sorry, it was just I kind of halfway through that I realised my pace was about half what I expected it to be.
Okay, you can leave it the answer until your part 2 presentation then.
No, it's fine, because actually I've got the answer right here. So because it was actually pre-prepared, and so right. Let's just do this. So here you go. There is so this is 210 by 260, the magazine size, yeah? So that's the trim size. So therefore, the frame that this picture is going in is 213 by 266. Now, why 213? Because that's obviously going into the spine. So you don't need to put bleed into the right-hand side here. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yep. So you've got a frame, a picture frame of 213 by 266. So top and bottom you've got bleed, and left you've got bleed, and if it was a right-hand page you'd have right bleed. So it's 213 by 266, right? Now, when you select the frame and then you click through to be on the picture, you've got your percentages up here. Okay, next to the width and height of all the attributes. So now you've got the percentages, and you can see that this is running at 71 and a bit %. Now that is the scale of the image. And if I just pop over to Photoshop, there's our image, and you can see that it's 30 by 40 centimeters at 300 ppi. And so you can see that that equates to, at 70%, that is going to be, you know, effectively filling width-wise that box. Now, the point to take on board with your question is that you, and I, you know, this is not a joke. The numbers you see here must always be 100% or below. Never scale up an image in InDesign. Never ever do it. So, because this is about effective resolution. So it is possibly a bit, you know, not really for this, but I'm going to just bring up the links pane. And I'm going to just draw your attention to, it's much further down the line, but this panel here is showing you the effective resolution of the images that are placed in the document. And you can see this one that we're clicked on, so it's highlighted, and it's 419 ppi. So that's
70% of 600 then.
It's so, well, basically it is. So if you divide 100 by 71.5 times 300, that equals 419.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you never want to be scaling up an image in InDesign. So because that's not the place to do it. Photoshop has got image interpolation algorithms to do image physical size. InDesign does not, and it'll end up in your final PDF, and it won't perform it properly. So you always want these numbers to be 100 or lower. Certainly, similarly, you can see the smaller images. This one, that's 678, and that's because, again, that is a 30 by 40 file. These are the ones, that one. Yeah, so that's 30 by 40 at 300. And so that physical size is not what we're running it at. We're running it at 18 centimeters by 13 centimeters, roughly. Yeah. And so this is quite a high number. I wouldn't want to see in a document anything higher, really, than that effective resolution number, because, in other words, it's being reproduced in its physical size in InDesign at basically just under, marginally under half of its physical pixel size. So
would you rather receive an image then for print that was, say, 50% above final print size, trim size?
Or
would you rather it be full? Yeah, if you wanted a full page image and you asked the
in an ideal world, you should prepare each image in Photoshop for the physical size of reproduction at 300 ppi.
Right. So if you were always sent an image that had been prepped for a full page bleed image,
yeah,
you could do whatever you like with it, but you couldn't zoom into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what would that image be? What would that resolution be then? Is it just literally 300 times the number of inches X and Y?
Well, so it obviously depends on your page size, but so, you know, do you mean in pixels? I mean, you can see here that a 30 by 40 centimeter file at 300 ppi is 3.5 by 4,500 pixels.
Yeah.
You know, that's gonna, you know, that's way oversized. That's nearly A3. Yeah, that's just shy of A3. The key is the resolution, and this is way more advanced, but it takes us to this question of why 300 pixels per inch. Yeah. And many people, there are many, 100 people could have 100 different arguments with me over what I'm about to say. But actually, this is about the screen of a printing device. So generally speaking, offset print, big printing machines, offset printers in the commercial world run a screen of 150 lines per inch. And to get the optimum input image resolution is always 2 times the screen. So in other words, the pixel density is twice the line density. And so some kind of like super duper fine art commercial printers might run a 200 screen. So that would be 200 lines per inch, and therefore your input image density for optimum output would be 400 ppi. Now, with resample turned off, if this image is going to run at 400 ppi, then that gives me a 30 by 22.5 centimeters document in physical size. Yeah. And so if our magazine was being printed at 200 lines per inch, then this same file would power a full page in it at 400 ppi, because it's still going to end up So let's actually, I'll edit that actually, because it makes no difference. And then you can see how that affects it in InDesign. Which one did I do? Oh, was it this one?
Yeah.
No, it's not going to save. So I don't know why that's not updating actually, but it's probably a deeper, longer conversation. But the key question here is that you are, this frame in its physical dimensions is 213 by 266. Therefore, you want to place an image in it which is as close to 100% of those physical dimensions or below as possible. You actually don't want to compress data either. So you don't want to see like massive files going in, so that's why I said about the effective res, you don't want to see it going much more than that, because that's half. So in other words, that's telling you, this 678 figure is telling you that the image size being input, its physical pixel dimensions at 300 ppi are double what they need to be, basically, because you're going to get no benefit from those extra pixels in the page. And actually over a certain tipping point, which is actually about 700, you get detriment, because you get something called dot gain, which is another long conversation. Does that help you at all? Does that help answer the question?
Sorry, yeah, I was on mute, sorry, yeah, it's great.
Okay, cool. Marvellous.
Anybody else? Any questions?
Martin, Jonathan, it's Tony May here. First of all, apologies for joining so late. Something came up, unfortunately. I'm hoping this might be available on replay afterwards. But
Yes.
yeah, great, thanks. I did post a question. It wasn't meant to be subversive, Jonathan. I don't know if you've addressed it already. I've got an old legacy version of InDesign, which I've used for many years, putting together full-page ads and a few brochures for clients. Which is fine, except that it has to run on a very old Mac now. And with Affinity Publisher being so cheap and a one-off perpetual license cost, I've downloaded that, although I've only used it for my own stuff at the moment. I haven't used it in anger for client work. I'm just wondering whether you had any views. I mean, I'm not intending to be subversive here, but a lot of us are going to be.
Yeah. I don't actually know anything about that particular piece of software. It's more than likely that it's going to have a whole load of capabilities which you'd expect. The key consideration I would have thought is about output, and just having the kind of PDF output control that you need, but it's difficult for me to say, because I'm blind, so I don't actually know anything about it. I mean, I know that the Adobe CC discussion will go on and on and on, and there's plenty of people out there who bought actual copies of software that are now almost impossible to run on anything. I mean, personally, I was kind of almost in that world until very recently, where I bit the bullet and moved from having about 5 different circa 2011 Macs to just ditching the whole shebang and buying a new one. And obviously you have to go along with the party, don't you? But I'm lucky enough to make use of pretty much every single piece of software in the full Adobe package. And I guess, and I don't wish to annoy anybody, but I remember it wasn't that long ago when to buy a single copy of a professional publishing piece of software was like nearly $1,000 in kind of 1999. and so my 50 quid a month to Adobe for, you know, what, nearly a dozen pieces of professional software, it kind of doesn't feel like that much of a steal. But I do understand the issue that, you know, older software becomes effectively defunct because you're being forced into that kind of new world, really, which is harsh, because, you know, it used to be that we could buy something for 300 quid and then it was ours, you know, and now we're tied. I do appreciate that. I just choose not to try and think about it.
Fair enough. On the PDF output, is it the X1A standard? Is that still pretty much?
Yeah, that's fine.
Accepted by all publishers. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would look at so, for instance, I'll just show you here. So, if I was to be outputting this, I would go to File, Adobe PDF Presets. Now, this shows you what's loaded in mine, and you've got X1A all the way to X4. Now, it's always a good idea to query what job options for output a printer actually wants from you, because the difference between X1A and X4 is not just a few bits of settings, but it's to do with compliance with different back-end Adobe Distiller prerequisites. And then you can see that I've got one called Sterling and one called Manson. These are two different printers. Manson Group, who I'm going to plug actually, because they're just wonderful friends of mine in St Albans, and Sterling Group, which prints a couple of magazines that I work on. Now, the issue here is that you need a piece of software that can accept job options from suppliers, really. Otherwise, you're going to be doing a lot of messing around, you know, because it's more common. It's very, very common now to be able to, you know, be in touch with a printer and say, can I have the job option, the PDF job options for this? So I don't know whether that piece of software you mentioned can accept job options files. I don't even know whether that's a proprietary file format to Adobe or not. But that would be one thing that would kind of put me in a bit of trouble if I was using a different piece of software and I could import job options. And then obviously I make my own as well. So like PodMR sRGB is a web one. So that means that's like an on-demand service. Medium res MR means, and it's sRGB because it's screen only. And so, you know, PDF job options are a key element in my workflow, and they're different for different people and different suppliers. So that would be one of my touch points, would be that. But you know, I would expect that the software you mentioned can probably do most things that you would need it to do, really, you know.
Yeah, I haven't checked yet, to be honest. I mean, I have still got a laptop here on my desk that I can boot into 10.6.8 and run InDesign 1.2, which is ancient, obviously, but it does the simple stuff that I need. But so far, I've only used Affinity for. I put my invoices onto that. You can import PDFs, and it will, you know, create all the objects and paragraphs and stuff from PDFs. So I haven't done anything that I had to send to a printer yet in it. So I haven't looked, to be honest.
Yeah,
but it's 50 quid, and you do wonder how they're ever going to stay in business charging only £50 for it. But there you go. You
know, kind of the only thing I'd question also is longevity. So, you know, is that software going to be continually developed? You know, is that company going to be around to make the next version that you know continues to comply with industry standards, etc., etc.? You know, I'm not defending Adobe in any way, but I know it's a complete.
No, I mean it's all valid. It's all valid. I mean,
but yeah, I mean, yeah, I reference things like Coral Draw, and there's a, you know, that's one that, you know, was supposed to be the equivalent of Illustrator, and you know, I think the Affinity stuff is on a different level to that, but
but yeah, I'm not an expert. So.
Yeah, you know what I mean. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good, brilliant. Thank you, Jonathan. I guess we're coming up to the 2-hour mark, so I'm very conscious of taking a lot of time. And as I said, we'll have series 2 or episode 2 in maybe I don't know, 'cause Christmas. Christmas is going to get in the way, isn't it now?
I know.
Maybe at the start of January then, when we're all back at work. So thank you, Jonathan, so much for doing that for us. I really do appreciate it. Thank you, everybody else,